JC, show me your hands and step away from the vehicle.
What's this about?
The Highway 101 stop. The driver says you identified...
To his colleagues, Brendan J.C. Tatum was the sergeant who ran Rohnert Park's drug interdiction unit. To the FBI, he was something else entirely. A highway robber with a badge.
Identified yourself as ATF.
We were conducting an interception stop.
Not out here, JC, not like that.
You don't know the whole situation.
He thought the badge made him untouchable. For nearly 3 years, Sergeant Brendan J.C. Tatum used it exactly that way. He pulled drivers over on Highway 101, miles outside his jurisdiction, claimed to be a federal agent, and walked away with their marijuana. Over $400,000 moved through his hands. Then a single phone call to the FBI in February 2018 ended all of it. 30 months in federal prison, $301,000 in restitution, and one of the most damning corruption cases the Northern District of California ever prosecuted against a sitting California officer. Before we go any further, I have to ask, what would you do if the person who pulled you over on a dark stretch of highway, in plain clothes, in an unmarked car, said he was a federal agent and told you to hand over what was in your trunk? Let me know in the comments. And if you're not subscribed yet, hit that button. This channel covers cases where the people with badges become the criminals, and the story you're about to hear is exactly that. Brendan J.C. Tatum was born in 1982 in Sonoma County, California. His parents were working-class Northern Californians. His father drove a long-haul delivery route for a regional dairy. His mother worked the front office at a vineyard equipment supplier in Healdsburg. J.C., the nickname every family member used, grew up in a single-story stucco house off Mountain View Avenue, with a chain-link fence around the yard and an above-ground pool his father installed himself the summer J.C. turned 8. At Pioneer High School in Santa Rosa, he played outside linebacker for 2 seasons, ran a 5. 140 and graduated in 2000, ranked in the middle of his class. His yearbook page listed his future plans as Police Academy. That was not a placeholder. That was the only line he had ever written on the form. He enrolled at Santa Rosa Junior College that fall, pulled a 2.8 GPA across 2 semesters of Administration of Justice coursework, then applied to the Santa Rosa Junior College Public Safety Training Center. He was 21 when he completed Basic Course 65, ranked 7th out of 43 cadets. His training officer, a retired Sonoma County Sheriff's deputy, wrote that Tatum demonstrated above-average tactical awareness and a willingness to take initiative in scenario-based drills. He hired on with the Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety in 2004. Rohnert Park is a small city about 10 miles south of Santa Rosa, population around 43,000 at the time, and the department is unusual in California. It operates as a combined police and fire agency. Officers train as both law enforcement and firefighters. Tatum was sworn in on July 19, 2004. His starting salary was $46,000. His early evaluations were unremarkable in the best possible way for an ambitious young officer. He was described as self-motivated, diligent in report writing, and showing strong interest in proactive enforcement, particularly narcotics interdiction. That last phrase showed up in 3 consecutive annual reviews. By 2008, he had volunteered for every interdiction-related training the department would pay for. Canine handler school, roadside interview techniques, hidden compartment identification, the Drug Enforcement Administration's commercial vehicle interdiction course. He married Erin Donovan, a registered nurse at Santa Rosa Memorial Hospital, in the fall of 2007. Their first daughter was born in 2009, their second in 2012. They bought a 4-bedroom on a cul-de-sac in southwest Santa Rosa with a 30-year mortgage and a backyard big enough for a trampoline. By 2012, Tatum was a senior patrol officer with a reputation for big numbers. He led the department in vehicle stops, vehicle searches, and narcotic seizures 4 years running. He could spot a tampered fuel tank from his cruiser window. He knew the body language of a driver hiding something before that driver ever knew he had been spotted. Department brass loved him. Local press loved him. He gave interviews about Highway 101 being a corridor for trafficking organizations and the importance of aggressive, proactive policing. In June 2014, he was promoted to sergeant. He was 31 years old. The chief assigned him to lead the department's brand new drug interdiction team. 2 officers reported directly to him. He chose every assignment, every shift, every vehicle stop. He set the targets. He kept the seizure log. He signed off on the evidence intake. He had complete operational control over a unit whose entire purpose was to take drugs and cash off of people. Nobody above him had a meaningful view into the day-to-day. That was the structural fact that mattered. And he had been preparing for it, consciously or not, for 10 years. To understand what Tatum did, you have to understand the world he operated in. The Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety is small, roughly 70 sworn officers covering a city of 43,000 people. Its drug interdiction team had no dedicated oversight unit, no independent audit of seizures, no rotating commander above the sergeant tier, specifically tasked with watching the watchers. The structure of interdiction policing in California was built on trust. The driver pulled over on Highway 101 trusts that the officer is who he says he is. The judge signing off on the seizure paperwork trusts that the officer recorded the stop accurately. The internal evidence custodian trusts that what gets booked in matches what was found. The chain of custody is the chain. If any link in it is a lie, the whole structure collapses. The vulnerability Tatum exploited was the simplest possible one. He stopped recording. He stopped wearing his uniform. He stopped writing reports. He operated in the negative space that proactive interdiction creates by default. A stop that never officially happened cannot be audited. A seizure that was never logged cannot be reconciled. Marijuana taken off a driver who is never going to call the police because that driver is himself transporting product leaves no paper trail at all. There was one more vulnerability, and it was the one that made the whole scheme possible. The Rohnert Park Evidence Room. State law requires that marijuana evidence be destroyed within a set time window after a case concludes. In small departments without dedicated destruction days, evidence sits. It sits for months, sometimes years. Bags pile up in the secure storage area waiting for a scheduled burn. Anyone with routine access to that room knows exactly what is sitting in there, how long it has been sitting, and roughly when it is going to be destroyed. Tatum had routine access. He was the sergeant who booked half the marijuana into that room. He knew the inventory better than the civilian evidence technician did, and he understood that a pound of marijuana that disappears before its scheduled destruction is a pound of marijuana that nobody is going to come asking about. The system was not designed to catch a sergeant. The system was designed to catch the drivers. That was the gap. The first stop investigators were ever able to firmly document took place in the early summer of 2015. Tatum and the second officer on his interdiction team, a younger officer named Joseph Huffaker, were riding in an unmarked silver SUV. They were off-duty. They were in jeans and untucked button-downs. Their body cameras were back at the station, hanging in their lockers. They positioned themselves at a turnout near Cotati on Highway 101, about 3 miles south of Rohnert Park's southern city limit. The interdiction unit had no legal authority to make traffic stops outside the city limits. That fact was not a hurdle. It was the whole point. A black Honda Accord with Humboldt County plates passed them in the slow lane just after 1 in the afternoon. Tatum pulled out, accelerated, and triggered the SUV's hidden emergency lights. The Honda drifted onto the shoulder. The driver, a 24-year-old from Eureka, watched in the rear view as 2 men in plainclothes approached his car on either side. What happened on that turnout in 2015 was not a traffic stop. Tatum identified himself as a federal agent. He used the phrase ATF task force. He said the Accord had been flagged in a transportation corridor investigation. He told the driver that there was probable cause to search the vehicle and that resisting would result in immediate arrest and federal charges. The driver had 18 pounds of vacuum-sealed marijuana in the trunk. He was on his way south from a permitted Humboldt grow operation, transporting to a buyer in the East Bay. He believed every word Tatum said. He stepped out, opened his trunk, and watched 2 men he believed to be federal agents load the 18 pounds into the back of an unmarked SUV. There was no paperwork, no receipt, no agency name on any document. The driver was sent on his way with a verbal warning and a threat that if he ever told anyone about the stop, federal indictment paperwork would land on his lawyer's desk within 72 hours. That was the template. Tatum and Huffaker would repeat it in various forms for almost 3 years. The stops happened on Highway 101, sometimes at the Wilfred Avenue exit, sometimes at the Cotati grade, sometimes as far north as the Cloverdale area, 50 miles outside Rohnert Park. The two officers used unmarked vehicles, plainclothes, and false federal credentials every time. Body cameras stayed off. Sometimes they were left back at the station entirely. The escalation pattern was textbook. The first stop, 18 pounds, was an experiment. By 2016, they were running multiple stops a month. By 2017, the cash counts at the back end of the operation were 5 figures per month. Tatum kept a rough mental ledger in his head. Investigators would later estimate that more than $400,000 in untaxed proceeds passed through his hands during the operational window. There was a second piece. The piece that, even in a corruption case this stark, made federal prosecutors stop and read the indictment paragraph twice. Tatum was also stealing from his own department's evidence room. In 2015 and 2016, he admitted to lifting marijuana that had been booked into Rohnert Park's evidence storage from earlier seizures. Pounds, on multiple occasions, that were supposed to be sitting in sealed bags waiting for scheduled destruction. He removed them from the secure storage area on his own authority as the supervising sergeant. He resold them through the same channels he was already moving the highway product through. He extorted additional cash from a handful of drivers who pleaded with him to release smaller seizures back to them. They paid. They could not exactly call the police about being shaken down by the police. He paid off credit card debt with cash. He purchased a 4-wheel drive truck outright. He took the family on a Hawaii trip. He never filed the income on his tax returns. The IRS would later document a clear pattern of unreported gross receipts across 3 consecutive tax years. He believed he had built something airtight. No reports, no body cam footage. Drivers too compromised by their own conduct to report him. An evidence room he personally supervised. A unit he personally ran. He was wrong about one assumption. He had assumed every driver he stopped would stay silent forever. Quick interruption before we get into the courtroom. If you're following along, drop a comment letting us know where you're watching from, and consider subscribing. This channel covers accountability cases that mainstream news quietly skips, and the next part of this one is exactly why these stories matter. In February 2018, a driver who had been stopped on Highway 101 by 2 men claiming to be ATF agents made a phone call, not to a lawyer, not to a local police department, to the San Francisco field office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation. The driver explained what had happened. He described the unmarked SUV. He described the 2 men in plainclothes. He described the claim of federal authority and the seizure of marijuana with no paperwork. He said he had spent months convinced that he had been robbed by federal agents and that calling anyone in law enforcement would only make it worse. He had finally talked to a family member who told him that no federal agency seizes drugs and then drives away without a receipt. The FBI took it seriously. The agent who caught the case began a quiet records review. He pulled traffic stop logs from the Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety. He cross-referenced license plate data from automated readers along the 101 corridor. He started building a list of drivers who had reported similar encounters. The list grew quickly. There were people who had told friends. There were people who had told family. There were people who had told their own attorneys in confidence. None of them had ever filed a formal complaint, because none of them believed a formal complaint would go anywhere when the men robbing them claimed federal credentials. The FBI's first overt move was almost gentle. The investigating agent contacted the Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety. He asked for the official police report on a specific traffic stop. He gave the date. He gave the approximate location on Highway 101. He gave the rough description of the unmarked SUV. He wanted, on paper, the agency's record of what had happened. The phone call landed on Tatum's desk. There was no police report. The stop had never been documented. The agency had no record of anyone in a Rohnert Park uniform pulling that vehicle over, because nobody in a Rohnert Park uniform had. The stop had been worked off duty, out of uniform, by two officers pretending to be ATF. A sergeant facing that situation has two choices. He can come clean. He can pick up the phone and say there is no report, because that stop was not what the caller is describing. Or he can dig. Tatum dug. He sat down with Huffaker. They drafted a fictional incident summary. They built a timeline that did not match what the driver had reported. They wrote the encounter as a brief consensual contact during a community caretaking sweep. They added benign details. They left out everything that mattered. They saved the document to the department's records management system as if it had always been there. Then they drafted something even more reckless. A short press release style summary about narcotics enforcement activity in the corridor, formatted as if it were an internal communications product, designed to corroborate the fake report. Tatum emailed the package to the FBI agent. That was the moment, more than any single highway stop, that turned the investigation from a corruption case into a federal indictment. Falsifying records in a federal investigation is its own discrete crime. The cover-up created the documentary evidence that would later anchor the prosecution. The FBI agent read the report. He read it twice. He noticed something a less experienced reviewer might have missed. The narrative described a stop that any patrol officer in any agency would have logged in the agency's computer-aided dispatch system in real time. There was no CAD entry. There was no radio transmission. There was no plate query from the original time of the stop. The report claimed an encounter that had left zero digital footprint in any of the systems that automatically log officer activity. That was the smoking gun, although it would take more than a year to fully build the case around it. The investigation that followed was meticulous. Federal agents pulled 3 years of cell phone tower data for both Tatum and Huffaker. They mapped every ping along Highway 101 against every documented traffic stop the agency had logged. The maps showed dozens of off-duty hours on the 101 corridor that did not correspond to any official agency activity. Agents pulled bank records. Tatum's deposits did not match his salary. There were repeated cash deposits structured just below the $10,000 reporting threshold. There were unexplained payments to a credit card account in his wife's name. There was the cash purchase of the four-wheel drive truck. There were vacation expenses that exceeded what any sergeant on a public safety salary should have been able to absorb. Agents pulled evidence room logs. The sealed bags from a handful of earlier marijuana seizures that should have been awaiting destruction were not in the storage area. Some had been entered into the system as destroyed without the standard destruction certification. Others were simply unaccounted for. The civilian evidence technician, interviewed under federal authority, confirmed that Sergeant Tatum had unsupervised access to the storage area on multiple occasions and had signed for items he never returned. Agents interviewed drivers. The list of victims who had been stopped under false ATF credentials grew. Each interview added another data point. Many drivers had been in the marijuana transportation business themselves and had assumed, reasonably, that calling law enforcement would only invite charges against them. Federal agents made clear that the interest was in the corrupt officers, not the drivers. The interviews opened up. By 2019, the case file was thick. Cell tower records, bank records, evidence room logs, driver statements. The fabricated report and press release that Tatum himself had sent to the investigating agent, sitting at the center of the file like a confession written in his own hand. In December 2019, Tatum was indicted in the Northern District of California. The lead charge was conspiracy to commit extortion under color of official right. There were also counts for falsifying records in a federal investigation and tax evasion. He was arrested. He was placed on administrative leave. He was no longer a sergeant. Before the courtroom, there was a federal interview room on Golden Gate Avenue in San Francisco. Tatum was sat down across a long table. His attorney sat to his right. The senior FBI agent on the case had every document spread out in front of him. The fake report, the fake press release, cell tower maps, bank statements, driver statements with names and dates. He laid them out in a deliberate order, one at a time. The agent began with the question that mattered. FBI agent: Sergeant Tatum, on the date in question, where were you between 3 and 5 in the afternoon? Tatum: I would have to check my schedule. FBI agent: You were not on duty. We have already confirmed that. Tatum: Then I was probably at home, or with my family. I do not recall specifically. FBI agent: Your cell phone pinged a tower on Highway 101 near Kotati at 3:47. The same tower pinged Officer Huffaker's phone 2 minutes earlier. Tatum: I drive that corridor regularly. That does not mean anything. The agent slid the fake police report across the table. FBI agent: Did you author this document? Tatum: I would have to review it. FBI agent: It is signed in your name. It is in the agency's records management system under your login. It describes a stop that, according to every other system in your agency, never occurred. Tatum: I'm going to need to speak with my attorney. The interview ended there, but it did not end there in any meaningful sense. Within a year, faced with the totality of the case file, Tatum's defense team began negotiating. In 2021, Brendan J.C. Tatum entered a guilty plea. He admitted to conspiracy to commit extortion under color of official right. He admitted to falsifying records in a federal investigation. He admitted to tax evasion. He admitted to the highway stops, to the false ATF claims, to the theft from his own department's evidence room, to the resale, and to the more than $400,000 in untaxed proceeds. He also agreed to testify against his former partner, Joseph Huffaker, who had not pleaded out. The Huffaker trial took place in 2025 in the same federal courthouse. Tatum sat in the witness chair, wearing a dark suit, and walked the jury through the entire operation. He named dates. He named amounts. He explained how the unmarked vehicle was outfitted. He described the false ATF claims he himself had used. He told the jury, in plain terms, that he and Huffaker had robbed drivers on the highway under color of law. Huffaker was convicted. He received 20 months in federal prison. Tatum's own sentencing was set for the following year. Sentencing came on May 6, 2026, in the courtroom of Senior United States District Judge Maxine M. Chesney in the Northern District of California. The courtroom was full. There were FBI agents who had worked the case for nearly a decade. There were IRS Criminal Investigation Special Agents who had documented the tax evasion. There were prosecutors from the United States Attorney's Office. There were a handful of victims, drivers who had been stopped on Highway 101 by a man falsely claiming to be a federal agent. There were members of Tatum's family seated in the back row. The prosecutor read the scope into the record. Conspiracy to commit extortion under color of official right. Falsifying records in a federal investigation. Tax evasion. More than $400,000 in unreported proceeds. The theft of marijuana from the Rohnert Park evidence room. The fabricated police report and press release sent to a sitting FBI agent during an active federal investigation. A driver who had been stopped on the Kotati grade in 2016 stood at the lectern. He read a victim statement. He said that for 2 years after the stop, he had refused to drive Highway 101. He said that every time he saw a vehicle behind him on the freeway with tinted windows, his hands shook. He said the worst part was not the loss of the marijuana. The worst part was being made to believe that the federal government, the country he had been raised to trust, was the entity that had robbed him on the highway. He said that finding out it had been 2 local cops was, in a way, worse, because it meant the people who were supposed to be protecting his town had been the criminals. Judge Chesney spoke directly to Tatum before pronouncing sentence. She said that the public's trust in law enforcement is the bedrock of the system. She said that when an officer abuses that trust to extort property from drivers on a public highway, the harm is not measured only in the dollars taken or the pounds stolen. The harm extends to every other officer who works honestly, every other agency that operates with integrity, every citizen who must now wonder whether the flashing lights behind them belong to someone who is actually authorized to use them. She said that the falsification of records during a federal investigation was, in some ways, the most troubling element of the entire case. It was not a moment of panic. It was a deliberate, sustained effort to obstruct federal investigators. It required Tatum to sit at a computer, draft a fictional account, and send it under his own name and authority to an FBI agent who was actively investigating him. She sentenced him to 30 months in federal prison, 3 years of supervised release, approximately $301,000 in restitution, additional forfeiture of assets linked to the illegal proceeds, the standard fines, the standard fees, the standard conditions. He was designated to a low-security federal correctional institution. He surrendered to begin his sentence. The Rohnert Park Department of Public Safety disbanded the drug interdiction team. The evidence room was audited. The policies were rewritten. Officers were retrained. The damage to the agency's reputation in Sonoma County took longer to repair than any policy change could measure. The drivers who had been stopped on Highway 101 by 2 men claiming to be ATF agents will live with that memory. Some of them carry it as a story they tell at dinner now, with an edge of disbelief. Some of them never trusted a uniform again. All of them learned, the hard way, that the protections we assume are built into our system depend on the integrity of the individuals inside it. Brendan J.C. Tatum was, for nearly 14 years, exactly the kind of officer his department put on recruiting posters. Big numbers, big seizures, big reputation. He turned that reputation into a private extortion racket and ran it for nearly 3 years. He stole from the evidence room he was supposed to protect. He forged a report to lie to federal investigators. And he was caught because a single driver, after months of silence, decided one phone call was worth the risk. That case was disturbing, but this next case on the right-hand side is even more shocking.